Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to be combining some lunar paste and die cuts. Last summer I did a video with some butterflies and I used these solar paste in the die cuts for the wings to create an iridescent wing. So this time I'm going to use the lunar paste and create some brightly colored wings within my die cut. The first thing I need to do is create my die cut, and I'm using this perspective butterfly die from Sizzix. It is a huge die and it's very intricate, and I regularly have a hard time cutting through it with just my regular cutting plate. So I'm using this precision plate from Sizzix as well in order to cut it through, and typically it will cut through in one pass. It just gives you a lot more pressure and it helps those blades to go through. I also like to use my Spellbinders all-in-one tool to get as many of those pieces out of the die as possible before pulling out my die cut. Typically, I'll do this right over top of the garbage can so I don't have a mess to clean up. Most of these pieces come right out. If by chance you don't get it done in one pass, you can turn it 180 degrees and put it back through. There's not a lot of different ways that you can change the that butterfly on your plates because it is so large. Once you have that completely die cut, I'm working on a Tim Holtz media surface mat here, and I'm taking a little bit of each one of my lunar paste colors and putting them right on the mat. I'm going to be using a tool to spread that out and get a nice thin coat on my mat to put that die cut in to let it dry. I have a large We Are Memory Keepers bone folder here. Simon Hurley has some paste tools that would be good to use for that, and I'll link that in the description and below. This is something that's discontinued, but it's what I had. Another option would be to use a piece of chipboard with a nice straight edge. Basically, you're wanting to spread it out, combine the colors so you get a little bit of the purple showing up between the pink and the blue. And you also want to try to create as thin and even a coat as possible. Once you have an area that is larger than your die cut, you can lay the die cut in there, and I'm using a die pick just to push different areas into that paste. I want to make sure that it has good contact, and once I have every area down that is lifted up a little bit and it has really good contact, I'm going to leave that to dry. Before I've left that to dry though, I did take that extra paste that is sitting on my tool there and I spread it out on other areas of my desk and frantically looked through my craft room for a die cut that I already had cut, and I managed to find a Spellbinders Anemone die cut that I had cut from or previously and put that in some of the excess. Once everything is completely dry, I'm just taking some detailed cutting scissors and I'm cutting around this die cut. If you use a die that happens to have a solid or an outline die, you could use that and then just die cut it. It would make it a lot easier. I ended up finding that taking some of the excess off just by tearing it, it teared around the edges fairly easily. It cut some of the cutting time or what I needed to cut down. Whatever doesn't come off, you can just use those detailed cutting scissors to cut. It's not the funnest part of the job, but it does make it look really, really nice once you have everything completely die cut. And then I also did that with the Anemones die cut as well. You can see how beautiful that looks with the black mixed media heavystock against that lunar paste. Now the mixed media heavystock has kind of a suede look to it, so it just looks gorgeous and you get two different textures there. There was one little part at the bottom of the tail that my paste must have been really, really thin, but when I lifted it off of the craft mat, it tore a little bit. So all I did was put a little bit of Barely Art glue that I had in a fine tip bottle on that piece and then put it down on some of my excess in order to fill that in. I just let it dry and then I cut that little piece out. Now I wanted to use this entire butterfly on the front of my card, so I'm making a custom sized card, and I'm also having that butterfly basically as the front of my card. So when I measured the butterfly on its own, it is 6 1/4 by 5 1/4. So I cut a piece of cardstock that is 6 1/4 by 5 3/4, and it'll make sense in a moment. I also have an inner card piece that I'm creating here that I cut at 10 inches by 6 inches. And I'm scoring that in half at the 5-inch mark. This way I have a nice white backing that butterfly is going to go against, and then there's going to be a pink rim or mat around the edges. Now for that piece here on the 5 3/4 side, I am going to score it at a 1/2 inch. And you can see when I put it in my score pal here, I'm having a hard time just doing that 1/2 inch mark. And I did it on that side just to show you how awkward it is to do it on the opposite side. My particular score pal doesn't have 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch score lines. So in order to get it at the 5 1/4 inch to get that score mark there, I needed to move that up 1/4 inch and then score 1/2 inch from the edge. So it just depends on which way you feel more comfortable. I find that it's much easier to hold it the left edge at the 1/4 inch mark and then score 1/2 inch from the right edge than it is to have my score line on the edge or on the left edge and try to score where it is. Now on that little piece that was scored and folded over, I'm taking the top of my butterfly wings and I'm just tracing around them. Typically, if you were to do a shaped card or shaped card front, you would put your die against the folded edge, a little bit of it over top of the folded edge, and you would take your plate and have the cut or the plate edge in line with the score line. But you can't do that with this particular butterfly because it's just a little bit too wide for those plates, as well as the fact that when I put the cardstock through my die cutting machine, it was just a little bit too tight. There was little wiggle room. And since that particular die is so intricate and it already has a hard time cutting with regular plates, I didn't want to chance it, and this was the solution. So after I've traced that area on the top there, I have my score line, and what I'm doing is I'm taking the Tim Holtz precision trimmer and I'm only cutting along that score line up to my pencil marks. Then I'm lifting that up, moving the blade up to the other side of the pencil mark, and then going forward. You'll see in a moment there are areas that are cut, and then there are areas at the top of where the wings are going to go that are not cut, and these are going to attach to the back of the card. Now I'm taking my Cutter Bee scissors and I'm just going to cut that pencil line up into my score line. And then we're going to glue that butterfly onto the front of here. Now, if you had a smaller die cut that you were doing this with, you wouldn't need to go and do this particular step. Your cutting die would do that when you put it in your machine with the die only going up to the score line. And I'll link to a video at the end of this one where I used a die to create a partial die cut on the front of a card. And it's going to make a lot more sense. Because this particular die is so large and I have to do it in a little bit of a different way, it makes it a little bit more confusing. But I wanted to show this way if you by chance had a really large die and wanted to make a shaped card front for your card. There is a way to do it. You just have to do it in a little bit of a different way. Now, lastly, I wanted my corners to be curved and rounded. So I took my corner rounder and just clipped off the tip of them. Now this corner rounder, it pretty much doesn't do more than one layer of cardstock. So it's really easy to do that pink part there. But when I go to do the folded edge on my white piece, all I'm doing is basically pressing that rounded edge shape in there. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to just trim them with my scissors. That way I get the same rounded edge, but I don't, really don't ruin the corner rounder trying to go through 2 layers of cardstock, because it's not meant for that and it just doesn't have the strength to do that. Once I did that, I put my corner rounder back on there and just trimmed any edges just to make it sure it was nice and even. Now I'm taking some of that Barely Art glue and I'm just putting glue on those 2 little tabs there to glue those butterfly wings on there. Now I want to make sure the edges of my wings are slightly higher than that folded edge. Once that is completely dry, if there happens to be any of that pink cardstock showing, I just take my scissors and trim that off. And off screen, I did another of the perspective butterfly die cuts to put on the back here. It's just going to make it look a little bit nicer than the Lunar paste with that tab on the glued to the top, as well as the fact that that mixed media cardstock, even though it's heavy, it's not necessarily heavy enough for the tips of the wings to hold the front of the card. So this is just going to give it a little bit more stability. Now the one thing to note is this is not a die cut that's exactly the same on both sides. So you do see the back of the die cut, and you want to make sure that you've got the right side glued down here. And then because that the front of the card, those wings are just a little bit over the edge, I needed to cut a little bit off of the back of them so that the card would fold properly. Now this insert can just get glued right to the back of the card, and this again does the same thing as the white piece on the front. It adds some stability to the back of the card, as well as giving you an area inside your card to write in without it being visible on the front of your card. In order to give it a little bit more sparkle, I just took some Stickles and put it in some of the little holes on the outside of the wings. And then you can either leave it as is, or you can do what I did, and I just put a little bit of glossy accents on the body of the butterfly. I wanted another texture there as well, and the glossy accents just gives some a little bit of dimension as well as some shine to the center of that body. Now you can see while I'm putting the glossy accents on, I'm holding that butterfly down. It wants to pop up a little bit. So when it's drying, I'm going to take a bottle and just put it on there to hold it down flat. Glossy accents, because it's a liquid medium, if I didn't do that, it would, by gravity, start to flow and create a thicker layer where it was lower and a thinner layer where it was higher. So in order to keep everything level, just a little bottle on there holding it flat while it's drying does the trick. Now for my Anemones die cut off screen, I die cut some ovals to frame it and coordinate with it. And then I'm just gluing those on with some Barely Art glue in a fine tip bottle, putting an acrylic block on the pieces that are drying while I'm putting glue on other ones. And then created a very simple Hello die cut from the wonderful script Sentiments die set from Spellbinders, and I'm going to layer that and put that on there. And I love the way the color blend behind that die cut looks. Again, this was not intentional. This was just using up the excess paste that I had on my desk. So I hadn't originally planned to do this, but I love when happy accidents like this happen and you get bonus projects out of what you're doing, because sometimes it just sparks different ideas. And I think this also would be beautiful to do with that solar paste as well, and have an iridescent center in the center of those flowers as well. Once I have the sentiment on the shadow, I let that dry for a few moments, then put some glue on it and put it onto the front of the card. Now, any sentiment would work here. I did a black sentiment to tie in the black from the oval, and then did a pink shadow behind it. Now I really wanted to put some black stickles in the centers of those flowers in order to tie in that black once again, but my black stickles bottle had very little left and is so old that it dried up. So a simple solution was to take a black Posca pen, color in the area, and just use regular stickles, and it worked out perfectly. Here is the finished card from the butterfly, and you can see it stands up perfectly on its own, but you can also stand it up with that white piece in the front and have that supporting it as well. I love how it just gives a little bit more of a different, interesting look to have that butterfly on the front. And then there was the bonus Anemones card. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.